These are my new boundaries, and I need you both to respect them." My husband Derek smirked as he exchanged a knowing glance with his best friend Cassandra, who was lounging at our cream-colored sofa like she owned it. They both burst into laughter. "Boundaries. Really, Natalie?" Derek chuckled, shaking his head. "What's next? A chore chart?" But when I calmly walked to our bedroom, packed my designer luggage, and headed for the door without a single tear, their laughter died in their throats. That Tuesday evening changed everything forever. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the bay windows of our Maplewood Heights home, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors I had spent countless weekends refinishing myself. It was supposed to be a simple conversation, one I had rehearsed in my mind for weeks. I had even written down my talking points on a small notepad, my handwriting neat and determined. But as I stood there in our spacious living room, facing two people who I thought cared about me, I realized that preparation meant nothing when you're dealing with people who had already decided your feelings didn't matter. Derek was sprawled across his favorite leather recliner, the one he'd insisted we buy despite my concerns about the cost. His sandy hair was perfectly tousled in that effortless way that had initially attracted me to him 7 years ago in that coffee shop downtown. Cassandra sat cross-legged on our sofa, her burgundy hair cascading over her shoulders, as she scrolled through her phone with manicured nails, acting as if this was just another casual Tuesday hangout. She had been coming over more and more frequently lately, sometimes without even calling first, sometimes when I wasn't even home. I had chosen my words carefully that day. I wasn't asking for much, just basic respect in my own home. "I need advance notice when friends are coming over," I had said, my voice steady despite the nervous flutter in my stomach. "I need our bedroom to remain private, and I need some evenings that are just for us, without constant interruptions." The requests weren't unreasonable. Any marriage counselor would have called them healthy boundaries. But Derek's reaction was swift and dismissive. He rolled his eyes dramatically, the same way he did when I asked him to help with household chores or when I mentioned feeling overwhelmed with managing everything alone. "Come on, Nat," he said, using the shortened version of my name that I had grown to hate. "You're being ridiculous. Cassie is like family. She's been my best friend since college. You know this." His tone was condescending, like he was explaining something obvious to a child who just couldn't grasp a simple concept. Cassandra didn't even look up from her phone. She just snorted softly, a sound that somehow managed to convey both amusement and disdain. "Boundaries," she repeated, drawing out the word like it was something distasteful she had found stuck to her shoe. "That's rich." The laughter that followed wasn't the kind shared between friends. It was pointed, deliberate, designed to make me feel small. Derek actually slapped his knee as if I had just told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. What's next? A curfew? Maybe some house rules posted on the refrigerator like we're college roommates? I felt the familiar heat rising in my cheeks, the same burning sensation I experienced whenever I tried to address issues in our relationship and was met with mockery instead of understanding. But this time, something was different. This time, instead of shrinking back and apologizing for having needs, I felt something shift inside me. It was subtle at first, like the moment when you realize you've been holding your breath without knowing it. I looked around our living room, at the throw pillows I had carefully arranged, at the family photos where I was always seemingly slightly out of frame, at the coffee table books that reflected Derek's interests, but none of mine. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, our shared space. But standing there watching two people laugh at my attempt to create basic respect in my own home, I realized it had never really been mine at all. "You know what?" I said quietly, my voice so calm it surprised even me. "You're absolutely right." They stopped laughing, confusion flickering across their faces. Derek raised an eyebrow. "Right about what?" "Boundaries are ridiculous," I continued, my tone conversational, almost cheerful. Why should I expect basic respect in my own home? Why should I think my feelings matter in my own marriage? I could see Derek trying to process whether this was sarcasm or surrender. Cassandra finally looked up from her phone, perhaps sensing that the dynamic in the room had shifted in a way she couldn't quite identify. I walked calmly to our bedroom that Cassandra had been using as her personal phone booth for private calls, our bedroom that apparently wasn't private enough to warrant a simple knock before entering. The suitcase came down from the top shelf of our walk-in closet with a soft thud. Designer luggage, a wedding gift from my Aunt Priscilla that I had never actually used for travel because Derek always preferred to pack light and stay in budget hotels. How fitting that its first real use would be for this journey. I packed methodically, folding my clothes with the same care I put into everything else in our home. My favorite dresses, the cashmere sweaters I had saved up to buy, the jewelry that actually belonged to me and not the relationship. Each item that went into the suitcase felt like a small act of reclamation. When I emerged from the bedroom, rolling the suitcase behind me, Derek and Cassandra were still sitting exactly where I had left them, but the laughter had died completely. The room was silent except for the gentle squeak of the suitcase wheels against the hardwood floor. "Where are you going?" Derek asked, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. I paused at the front door, my hand resting on the brass handle that I had polished just that morning out of habit. "Somewhere my boundaries aren't considered a punchline," I replied simply. And with that, I opened the door and stepped into the evening air, leaving behind two people who had just learned that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one preparing to make the loudest statement of all. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. 7 years earlier, I had believed in fairy tales. Not the Disney kind with singing animals and magic wands, but the grown-up version where love conquers all and two people build something beautiful together. Derek Thornfield had seemed like everything I was looking for when we met at that little cafe on Riverside Avenue in downtown Millbrook. He was charming, ambitious, and had this way of making me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room. Our courtship was a whirlwind of romantic dinners, weekend getaways to his family's cabin in Pine Ridge, and late-night conversations about our dreams. He talked about wanting to build a life with someone who understood him, someone who could be his partner in every sense of the word. I had never felt so seen, so valued. When he proposed on the beach at Sunset Cove during our second anniversary trip, I didn't hesitate to say yes. The early days of our marriage were everything I had hoped for. We bought the house in Maplewood Heights together, spending weekends at antique shops and home improvement stores, planning our future room by room. Derek was attentive and involved, asking my opinion on everything from paint colors to furniture placement. I felt like we were truly building something together, creating a space that reflected both of our personalities and dreams. But somewhere between the honeymoon phase and settling into real life, things began to shift in ways so subtle I didn't notice them at first. It started with small things, like Derek making plans without consulting me, or changing decisions we had made together without discussion. When I bought throw pillows for the living room in soft blues and greens, colors we had agreed on, he replaced them with burgundy ones the next week because they looked better with the leather furniture. "I thought we decided on the blue ones," I had said gently, not wanting to start an argument over something so small. "Did we? I don't remember that," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, these look better. Trust me." And I did trust him. That was the problem. I trusted him when he said my memory was faulty. I trusted him when he assured me that his way was better. I trusted him when he gradually began making more and more decisions without including me in the process. Cassandra entered our lives about 3 years into our marriage. Derek had mentioned his college best friend before, stories about late-night study sessions, spring break adventures, and inside jokes that spanned over a decade. But he had also mentioned that they had lost touch after graduation, so I was surprised when she suddenly reappeared during a work conference in the city. "She's going through a rough divorce," Derek explained after their first reunion dinner, which I hadn't been invited to. "Her ex really did a number on her. She needs friends right now." I understood completely. Having been through my own share of difficult relationships before Derek,
I knew how important it was to have a support system during tough times. I encouraged Derek to be there for her, even suggested we invite her over for dinner so I could meet her properly. That first dinner had gone well, or so I thought. Cassandra was beautiful in an effortless way with wild burgundy curls and a laugh that filled the room. She was funny, telling stories about her travels as a freelance photographer that had us both entertained for hours. She seemed grateful for our hospitality, thanking me multiple times for the meal and complimenting our home. "You have such a gift for making spaces feel warm," she had said, running her fingers along the dining table I had refinished myself. "Derek is so lucky to have someone who cares about creating a real home."
At the time, I had taken it as a genuine compliment. I prided myself on making our house feel like a sanctuary, a place where Derek could relax and recharge after long days at his consulting firm. I spent hours researching design ideas, hunting for unique pieces at estate sales, and carefully curating every detail to reflect the life we were building together. But as Cassandra became a more frequent visitor, I began to notice changes in the dynamic of our home. It started with phone calls that Derek would take in another room, conversations that would end abruptly when I entered. Then came the inside jokes I wasn't part of, references to shared memories I couldn't understand. "You had to be there," became Derek's standard response when I asked about something they found hilarious. "It's a college thing." Slowly, imperceptibly, I began to feel like a guest in my own home. Cassandra would show up unannounced, letting herself in with the spare key Derek had given her for emergencies. I would come home from my job at the Millbrook Public Library to find them deep in conversation on the sofa, their voices dropping to whispers when they noticed me. "Oh, hey, Nat," Derek would say casually, as if there was nothing unusual about his friend being in our living room without my knowledge. "Cassie was just stopping by. We were catching up." I tried to join their conversations, but somehow always felt like I was interrupting something private. They spoke in shorthand, finishing each other's sentences, referencing people and experiences I knew nothing about. When I attempted to share stories from my own life, funny incidents from work, things I had read, or places I wanted to travel, their attention would drift. Derek would check his phone, or Cassandra would suddenly remember something urgent she needed to tell him. The living room gradually became their space, rather than ours. Cassandra's photography magazines appeared on the coffee table alongside Derek's business journals. Her favorite herbal tea took up residence in our kitchen cabinet. Her spare charger claimed a permanent spot by the outlet near the sofa. When I mentioned feeling a bit overwhelmed by the constant visits, Derek's response was swift and dismissive. "She's going through a hard time, Nat. Try to be more understanding. Besides, she's my oldest friend. I can't just abandon her when she needs support." The implication was clear. I was being selfish and unsupportive. I was failing as a wife and as a human being by wanting some boundaries around our personal space and time together. So I pushed down my discomfort and tried harder to be welcoming, to be the understanding partner Derek seemed to need me to be. But understanding, I was beginning to learn, was a one-way street in our marriage. And that street was rapidly becoming a highway where I was expected to move aside for every oncoming vehicle, no matter how much space I had to give up in the process. The erosion of my place in my own home didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, methodical process that felt almost choreographed in its precision. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moments when things shifted from uncomfortable to completely unacceptable. But at the time, each incident seemed isolated, manageable, something I could adapt to if I just tried a little harder. The first major incident happened on my birthday last March. I had been looking forward to it for weeks, not because I expected anything elaborate, but because Derek had promised we'd spend the evening together. Just the two of us, like we used to do. I had even bought a new dress from Rosewood Boutique downtown, a deep emerald green that made my eyes pop. It wasn't expensive, but it was special to me because I had saved up for it over several months. I spent the afternoon preparing Derek's favorite meal, rosemary lamb with roasted vegetables and homemade dinner rolls.
The dining room table was set with our wedding china and the good silverware we only used for special occasions. I had even splurged on a bottle of wine from Vintage Cellars, the little shop on Maple Street where the owner always remembered my name and preferences. Derek came home from work right on time, which felt like a good sign. He kissed my forehead and complimented the aroma coming from the kitchen. For a moment, everything felt like it used to feel between us. Warm, connected, intentional. But then his phone rang. "It's Cassie," he said, glancing at the screen. "I should probably take this. She sounded upset earlier." I watched from the kitchen doorway as he answered, his voice immediately shifting to the concerned, attentive tone he used to reserve for me. The conversation stretched on for 20 minutes, then 30, then 45 minutes. I could hear fragments of it from where I stood, something about her ex-husband demanding more money, her photography business struggling to find clients, her feeling overwhelmed and alone.
I nodded, trying to swallow both my disappointment and the lump forming in my throat. "It's okay," I heard myself say, though it wasn't okay at all. "I understand." But Derek wasn't finished. As we began eating our lukewarm dinner, his phone buzzed with a text message, then another, then a third. "She's really struggling," he said, reading the messages with a frown. "I think I should go over there, just for a little while, to make sure she's okay." The birthday dinner I had planned and prepared was abandoned 40 minutes after it began. Derek changed out of his work clothes and headed to Cassandra's apartment on Pine Street, leaving me alone with dirty dishes, melted candle wax, and the realization that my needs would always come second to hers. "I'll make it up to you," he called over his shoulder as he left. "We'll do something special this weekend." We never did. The weekend plan became a pattern, promises made and quietly forgotten, my expectations repeatedly lowered to accommodate the crisis of the moment. And there was always a crisis. Cassandra's life seemed to be an endless series of emergencies that required Derek's immediate attention and emotional support. Her car broke down during a thunderstorm, and Derek spent 3 hours in the rain helping her deal with the tow truck and rental car arrangements. Her photography client canceled a major contract, and Derek took her out for drinks to help her strategize her next steps. Her apartment's air conditioning died during the heat wave, and Derek invited her to stay in our guest room until it gets fixed, a repair that somehow took 2 weeks to complete. During those 2 weeks, our morning routine changed completely. I used to enjoy quiet coffee on our back patio before work, reading the news and planning my day. But Cassandra was an early riser who preferred to exercise in our living room, her yoga mat spread across the hardwood floor while she followed along with loud online videos. When I mentioned that the volume was disturbing my morning routine, Derek suggested I could drink my coffee in the kitchen instead. "It's just temporary, Nat. Try to be flexible." Flexibility, I was learning, was a one-way street that led directly away from my own comfort and preferences. The guest room stay extended when Cassandra decided she needed more time to figure things out. The temporary arrangement became semi-permanent when she started receiving mail at our address. It became permanent when Derek helped her move the rest of her belongings into what was now, apparently, her room. "It makes financial sense," Derek explained when I finally worked up the courage to ask about the timeline. "She can save money while she gets her business back on track, and we can use the extra income." Except there was no extra income. Cassandra's contributions to household expenses were sporadic at best, usually accompanied by detailed explanations about why her photography business was having a slow month or why her divorce settlement was being delayed. Derek covered the shortfalls without complaint, often using money from our joint savings account without discussing it with me first. Our bedroom became the only space in the house that felt truly private, until it didn't. Cassandra had a habit of entering without knocking, claiming she thought no one was home or that she needed to borrow something urgently. I would emerge from the shower to find her rifling through my jewelry box looking for something cute to borrow for a date. I discovered her trying on my clothes while I was at work, explaining that she wanted to see if we were the same size before asking to borrow anything. "You don't mind, do you?" she would ask with that disarming smile, as if the question was just a formality since she had already helped herself to whatever she wanted. When I brought these incidents up with Derek, his response was always the same.
I was being territorial and unwelcoming. I was making Cassandra feel uncomfortable in what was supposed to be a safe space for her. I was being unsupportive during her time of need. She's been through a lot, Nat. Try to put yourself in her shoes. How would you feel if you had to start over completely? I wanted to point out that I had started over completely when I married him and moved to Maplewood Heights, leaving behind my friends and job in Riverside City. I wanted to remind him that I had never had a friend live with us for months without contributing equally to expenses. I wanted to ask when my feelings and comfort had stopped mattering in my own home. But every time I tried to voice these concerns, Derek had a way of making me feel selfish and small. He would sigh heavily, run his hair through his hair, and explain patiently why I was overreacting or misunderstanding the situation. He would remind me of Cassandra's difficult circumstances and suggest that I try to be more empathetic. The phrase, try to be more, became a constant refrain in our conversations. Try to be more understanding. Try to be more flexible. Try to be more welcoming. Try to be more supportive. The implication was always clear. I wasn't enough. I wasn't trying hard enough. I wasn't being the wife and hostess and friend that the situation required me to be.
So I tried harder. I bought Cassandra's favorite coffee and kept it stocked in our kitchen. I researched photography opportunities and forwarded relevant listings to her email. I included her in dinner plans and invited her to join us for movie nights and weekend activities. But the harder I tried to be accommodating, the more space she seemed to take up. Her photography equipment spread from the guest room to the living room to the dining room. Her friends started visiting regularly, treating our home like an extension of her social circle. Her schedule became our schedule, her preferences, our preferences, her needs, our priorities. And through it all, Derek seemed oblivious to how completely his best friend had rearranged our lives. Or maybe he wasn't oblivious. Maybe this was exactly what he wanted. A wife who would fade quietly into the background while he focused on more interesting, more demanding relationships. I began to feel like a supporting character in my own life, watching from the sidelines as two people rewrote the story I thought we were telling together. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday evening in February when I discovered Cassandra wearing my grandmother's necklace to one of her photography networking events. It wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was a delicate silver chain with a small pearl pendant that my grandmother Rose had given me before she passed away 3 years ago. It was the only thing I had left of her, besides memories and a recipe for her famous apple cinnamon bread that I still made every Christmas. I had been searching for the necklace for weeks, planning to wear it to my colleague Jennifer's wedding at the Willowbrook Country Club. I had looked through my jewelry box countless times, checked the bathroom counter, even searched through the laundry, thinking it might have gotten caught in a shirt collar. It never occurred to me that someone else might be wearing it. But there it was, gleaming against Cassandra's black cocktail dress as she posed for photos in our living room before heading out to her event. She was laughing at something Derek had said, her head thrown back in that carefree way that seemed to come so naturally to her. My grandmother's necklace catching the light from our crystal chandelier. "That's my necklace," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Cassandra looked down at her chest as if she had forgotten what she was wearing. "Oh, this? I found it in the guest room drawer. I thought it was costume jewelry. It's so delicate and pretty, I didn't think you'd mind if I borrowed it." Found it in the guest room drawer. The guest room that used to be my home office, where I had kept a small jewelry box with my most precious pieces because the main bedroom box was getting too crowded. The guest room that was now Cassandra's permanent residence, where apparently my belongings were considered community property. "It was my grandmother's," I managed to say, my hands trembling slightly. It's really important to me." "Oh." Cassandra's expression shifted to something that might have been embarrassment, though it was hard to tell. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Of course, I'll give it back." She reached behind her neck to unclasp it, but Derek stepped forward. "Actually, she's already running late for her networking thing. Can't she just return it tomorrow? It's not like you need it tonight, right, Nat? The casualness of his question hit me like a physical blow. It's not like you need it tonight, as if my emotional connection to the piece was less important than Cassandra's networking outfit, as if my grandmother's memory was something that could be scheduled around someone else's social calendar. I would really like it back now, I said, my voice stronger this time. Please. Cassandra sighed and began removing the necklace, but I could see the irritation in her movements. I really didn't know it was special, Natalie. You don't have to make such a big deal about it. Don't make such a big deal about it. The phrase echoed in my head as I gently took the necklace from her hands, feeling the familiar weight of the small pearl against my palm. How had wanting my own jewelry back become making a big deal? How had protecting my grandmother's memory become an overreaction? That night, after Cassandra left for her event and Derek settled in to watch television, I sat alone in our bedroom holding the necklace and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to really feel the anger that had been building inside me. Not the quick flashes of irritation that I pushed down to keep the peace, but the deep, burning rage that comes from being repeatedly told that your feelings don't matter. I made a decision that night. I was going to start standing up for myself, even if it meant rocking the boat that Derek seemed so determined to keep steady.
The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I rearranged our living room furniture back to the way Derek and I had originally set it up before Cassandra's photography equipment had taken over half the space. I moved her tripods and light reflectors back to the guest room where they belonged. I put our family photos back on the mantelpiece where her portfolio samples had been displayed. I reclaimed our coffee table from the stack of photography magazines and replaced them with the books Derek and I used to read together. When Derek came downstairs for breakfast, he stopped in the doorway and frowned. "What happened to the living room?" "I reorganized it," I said simply, buttering my toast with deliberate calm. I wanted our space back. "But where is Cassie supposed to meet her clients now? She uses the living room for her consultations." "She can use the guest room, or she can rent office space like other business owners do." Derek's frown deepened. "Nat, come on. You know she's still getting back on her feet financially. Don't be like this." Don't be like this. Another phrase to add to the growing collection of ways Derek dismissed my attempts to assert any control over my own home. But this time, I didn't back down. Be like what, exactly? Be like someone who wants to use her own living room? Be like someone who doesn't want her home turned into someone else's office space? "You're being unreasonable," Derek said, his voice taking on the patient, condescending tone he used when he thought I was being emotional. "Cassie is going through a hard time. We're helping her get back on her feet. I thought you understood that." "I understand that she's been living here for 4 months. I understand that she's not contributing equally to expenses. And I understand that somehow my needs and preferences have become completely irrelevant in my own home." Derek stared at me for a long moment, as if he was seeing me for the first time in months. "What's gotten into you?" What's gotten into me? As if standing up for myself was some kind of personality disorder. As if wanting basic respect in my own home was a character flaw that had suddenly appeared overnight. "Nothing's gotten into me," I said, finishing my toast and standing up from the breakfast table. "I'm just tired of being invisible." That afternoon, while Derek was at work and Cassandra was out job hunting, I reclaimed the guest room office space. I moved my desk back from the basement storage area where it had been banished to make room for Cassandra's bed. I set up my computer and reorganized my files. I hung my diplomas back on the wall and put my books back on the shelves. When Cassandra returned that evening, she stood in the doorway of what was no longer exclusively her room, her arms crossed and her expression confused. "Did you move my stuff?" "I moved my stuff back," I corrected. "This was my office before it became your bedroom. I need workspace too." "But where am I supposed to put my clothes and my photography equipment?"
We'll figure something out, I said, not looking up from the papers I was organizing. Maybe you can look into renting a studio space? I saw some affordable options listed on Craigslist. Cassandra stood there for another moment, clearly waiting for me to offer an alternative solution or apologize for the inconvenience. When I didn't, she huffed and walked away, her footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors. Derek's reaction that evening was swift and predictable. He cornered me in the kitchen while I was preparing dinner, his voice low and frustrated. "What are you doing, Nat? First the living room, now the office. You're making Cassie feel unwelcome in our home." Maybe that's because she is unwelcome. At least she should be by now. Normal house guests don't stay for 4 months without contributing equally to expenses. She's not a house guest. She's a family. She's my oldest friend and she needs our help. And what about what I need? When do my needs matter? When do I get to feel comfortable in my own home? Derek ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now recognized as his way of buying time when he didn't want to address the actual issue I was raising. "You're being selfish," he said finally. "This isn't like you." But that was exactly the problem. This was like me. The real me. The one who had opinions and boundaries and needs. The me who had been slowly disappearing under layers of compromise and accommodation and try to be more understanding. I had been so busy trying to be the wife Derek seemed to want that I had forgotten how to be the woman I actually was. "Maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do," I replied quietly.
That night, I moved my grandmother's necklace to a small safe I kept in our bedroom closet, along with my other precious jewelry and important documents. It was a tiny act of protection, but it felt significant. I was starting to learn that sometimes the smallest acts of self-preservation are actually the biggest acts of rebellion. My small acts of rebellion should have been a wake-up call, but instead they seemed to galvanize Derek and Cassandra into a united front against what they clearly saw as my unreasonable behavior. The living room furniture mysteriously returned to Cassandra's preferred arrangement while I was at work. My office supplies disappeared from the guest room desk, replaced by her photography portfolios and client contact sheets. When I moved things back, they would be moved again the next day, creating a silent war of territorial rearrangement that left me feeling exhausted and slightly insane. But despite the mounting tension, some foolish part of me still believed that Derek and I could work through this. After all, we had been happy once. We had built something together, created a life that felt meaningful and full of promise. Surely that foundation still existed somewhere beneath all the chaos that Cassandra's presence had introduced into our marriage. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of confronting the problems head-on, which seemed to only make Derek more defensive, I would focus on rebuilding our connection. I would remind him of who we used to be together before our relationship became a constant negotiation around someone else's needs and feelings. I started small. I bought tickets to the spring production at the Millbrook Community Theater, something Derek and I used to do regularly during our early years of marriage. Romeo and Juliet was playing at the historic Meridian Playhouse downtown, the same venue where we had seen our first show together during our engagement. I presented the tickets over dinner, wrapped in tissue paper, like a small gift. "Remember how much we used to love going to shows?" I said, trying to keep my voice light and hopeful. "I thought it might be nice to start doing that again." Derek looked at the tickets with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "That's a great idea, Nat. It's been too long since we did something like this." He leaned over and kissed my cheek, and for a moment, everything felt normal between us again. But when the night of the show arrived, Derek appeared in the living room wearing jeans and a casual button-down, car keys in his hand. Beside him stood Cassandra, dressed in an elegant black dress that I was fairly certain belonged to me, although I couldn't be completely sure since she had been borrowing my clothes so frequently. "Ready to go?" Derek asked cheerfully, as if nothing was unusual about the situation. "Go where?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand what was happening.
To the theater. I mentioned the show to Cassie, and she's never been to the Meridian Playhouse. I thought it would be fun if she joined us. The tickets I had bought were for 2 people. The evening I had planned was meant to be an intimate date night, a chance for Derek and me to reconnect without the constant presence of his best friend. But somehow, once again, my intentions had been transformed into something else entirely. I only bought 2 tickets, I said carefully. Oh, that's okay, Cassandra chimed in, her voice bright and seemingly oblivious to my discomfort. I can get one at the box office. They usually have last-minute seats available. And so our romantic evening became a group outing. I sat between Derek and Cassandra in the theater, watching a tragedy about doomed love while feeling like I was living in one myself. During intermission, they discussed the themes and production values with an enthusiasm that seemed to exclude me entirely. When I offered my own interpretation of the balcony scene, Derek nodded politely but immediately redirected the conversation back to something Cassandra had said. I tried again the following week. Derek had mentioned missing the hiking trails at Copper Mountain State Park, a place we used to visit regularly on weekends before our lives became so complicated. I packed a picnic lunch with all his favorite foods, turkey sandwiches with the expensive mustard from Gourmet Gardens, homemade chocolate chip cookies, and fresh fruit from the farmer's market on Cedar Street. I thought we could spend Saturday at Copper Mountain, I suggested over breakfast Friday morning. Just the 2 of us, like we used to do. Derek's face lit up. That sounds perfect. I've been so stressed at work lately. A day in nature is exactly what I need. I felt a surge of hope. This would be it, our chance to remember what we had together, away from the house and all the complicated dynamics that Cassandra's presence had introduced into our marriage. But Saturday morning brought the now familiar sound of Derek's voice explaining to Cassandra about our hiking plans, followed by his invitation for her to join us. When I pointed out that I had only packed food for 2 people, Derek suggested we could stop at the grocery store and pick up additional supplies. The more the merrier, right? He said, completely missing the disappointment that I was sure was written all over my face.
The hike became another group activity. Cassandra, it turned out, was an experienced outdoors woman who knew far more about local flora and wildlife than I did. She identified bird species by their calls and pointed out native wildflowers along the trail, impressing Derek with her knowledge. She had brought her professional camera equipment and took artistic photographs of everything from twisted tree branches to distant mountain vistas. I walked behind them on the narrow trail, listening to their animated conversation about aperture settings and composition techniques, feeling like a third wheel on my own romantic outing. When we reached the summit overlook, where Derek and I used to sit quietly together, just enjoying the view and each other's company, Cassandra immediately began setting up her tripod for a photo shoot. "This light is absolutely perfect," she declared, directing Derek to stand in various poses against the scenic backdrop. "Move a little to the left. Now tilt your head slightly." "Perfect!" I offered to take some photos of Derek and Cassandra together, thinking it might be a way to participate in the moment. But when I suggested that Derek and I take some pictures together, Cassandra was already packing up her equipment, eager to move on to the next scenic spot she had identified on the trail map. The pattern continued for weeks. Every attempt I made to create special moments with Derek somehow became an opportunity for Cassandra to join us. Our anniversary dinner at Rosewood Manor became a celebration of Cassandra's new photography contract. Our weekend trip to visit Derek's parents in Riverside Falls became a chance for Cassandra to meet his family and charm them with stories of her travels. Our quiet Sunday morning coffee ritual became a 3-way discussion of Cassandra's latest dating adventures. I began to feel like I was fighting for my husband's attention in my own marriage, competing with someone who seemed to effortlessly capture his interest and enthusiasm in ways I no longer could. Every conversation we started alone would be interrupted by Cassandra's arrival,
Every plan we made together would be expanded to include her. Every intimate moment would be diluted by her presence. But the most painful part wasn't the constant interruptions. It was Derek's complete obliviousness to what was happening. When I tried to explain how I was feeling, he would look at me with genuine confusion, as if I was describing a problem that existed only in my imagination. "Cassie is just enthusiastic about life," he would say. "She's interested in the things we do together. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't it nice to have friends who want to spend time with us?" He couldn't see, or wouldn't see, that there was a difference between having friends who occasionally joined our activities and having someone who had essentially moved into our relationship along with our spare bedroom. He couldn't understand that my desire for alone time with my husband wasn't antisocial or exclusionary. It was a basic need that every marriage requires to survive. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe this was how modern marriages worked, with fluid boundaries and expanded definitions of family. Maybe I was just too traditional, too possessive, too needy in my expectations of what a marriage should be. But late at night, lying in bed next to Derek while he slept peacefully, I would think about the early days of our relationship. I would remember how protected and cherished I used to feel, how excited Derek used to get about planning surprises just for me, how he used to prioritize our time together above everything else. That version of our marriage felt like a ghost now, something I could barely remember and definitely couldn't reclaim. But some stubborn part of me wasn't ready to let it go completely. Some hopeful part of me still believed that if I could just find the right approach, the right words, the right moment, I could make Derek see what we were losing. I kept trying, kept hoping, kept believing that the man I had married was still there somewhere beneath all the divided attention and misplaced priorities. I told myself that this was just a difficult phase, a temporary situation that would resolve itself once Cassandra got back on her feet and moved on with her life. But as spring turned into summer and Cassandra's temporary stay stretched toward its 6th month, I began to realize that hoping for change wasn't the same as actually creating it. And sometimes the person you're trying hardest to save is the one who's already decided you're not worth saving. The conversation that changed everything started with what seemed like good news. Derek came home from work on a humid Tuesday evening in late June, his face brighter than I had seen it in months. He found me in the kitchen where I was preparing a simple dinner of grilled chicken and summer vegetables and wrapped his arms around my waist from behind, a gesture of casual affection that had become increasingly rare. He said, "I have some exciting news," his breath warm against my ear. Johnson & Associates offered me the senior consultant position in their new branch office.
I turned in his arms, genuinely thrilled for him. Derek had been working toward a promotion like this for over 2 years, putting in long hours and taking on additional projects that often kept him at the office until well past dinner time. The position would mean better pay, more interesting projects, and the kind of professional recognition he had been craving. "That's incredible," I said, standing on my tiptoes to kiss him properly. "When do you start? What will your new responsibilities be?" "That's the interesting part," Derek said, his smile widening. "The position is in Burlington Heights, about 3 hours north of here. It's a beautiful area, right on Lake Harmony, surrounded by mountains. The company is offering a generous relocation package, and the cost of living is significantly lower than Maplewood Heights." My heart did a little flutter of excitement mixed with anxiety. A move would be a major change, but it could also be exactly what our marriage needed. A fresh start in a new place, away from all the complicated dynamics that had developed in our current home. A chance to rebuild our relationship without the constant presence of Derek's best friend. When would we need to move? I asked, already mentally cataloging everything that would need to be organized and packed. The position starts in September, so we'd probably want to be settled by late August. I know it's fast, but the opportunity is too good to pass up. Derek's excitement was infectious, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about our future together. We spent the evening making lists and discussing possibilities. Derek had already researched neighborhoods in Burlington Heights, identifying several areas that would be perfect for us. There is a charming historic district with Victorian houses that reminded him of the Maplewood Heights area we had fallen in love with. The local library system was supposed to be excellent, which would make finding a new position much easier for me. We could get a house with a proper office for you, Derek said, squeezing my hand across the dinner table. Maybe something with a view of the lake. You always said you wanted to try watercolor painting. This could be the perfect opportunity to finally take those art classes you've been talking about. The fact that he remembered my interest in watercolor painting surprised and touched me. I hadn't mentioned it in over a year, not since Cassandra had taken over the guest room and eliminated my quiet creative space. But Derek had been paying attention, even when it didn't seem like it. That night, we stayed up late looking at real estate listings online, planning our new life together with an enthusiasm that reminded me of our early days of marriage. We talked about hosting dinner parties in our new home, exploring the hiking trails around Lake Harmony, maybe even getting the dog we had always talked about, but never quite found time for. For the first time in months, Derek seemed fully present with me. His phone stayed silent on the kitchen counter while we dreamed and planned together. He asked for my opinions on everything from floor plans to school districts, treating my input as valuable and necessary rather than optional or inconvenient. I think this could be really good for us, he said as we finally headed upstairs to bed. A chance to start fresh, Just focus on each other and what we want to build together. I fell asleep that night feeling more optimistic about our marriage than I had in months. The move would solve so many of our current problems. Cassandra would obviously need to find her own place in Maplewood Heights rather than relocating with us. Derek and I would have distance from all the complicated dynamics that had developed around his friendship with her. We could rebuild our relationship on solid ground, away from all the resentment and tension that had accumulated in our current home. The next few days passed in a blur of excited planning. Derek scheduled a house hunting trip to Burlington Heights for the following weekend. I researched library positions in the area and found several opportunities that looked promising. We started making lists of items to donate or sell before the move, talking about downsizing and simplifying our lives. I even allowed myself to start imagining what our new home might look like. Something with large windows overlooking the lake, perhaps. A kitchen with enough space for the breakfast nook that we had always wanted. A proper office where I could work and pursue my creative interests without constantly negotiating for space. Derek seemed genuinely excited about sharing these plans with me, asking my opinion on everything from mortgage options to moving company recommendations. For the first time in months, I felt like we were functioning as a true partnership again, making important decisions together as equals. But then Friday evening arrived, and with it, the conversation that shattered all of my newfound hope.
Derek came home from work carrying takeout from Golden Dragon, our favorite Chinese restaurant on Elm Street. He had also picked up a bottle of wine, the good stuff from Morrison's wine shop, not the everyday bottles we usually bought at the grocery store. It felt like a celebration, and I assumed we were toasting his new job opportunity and our upcoming fresh start. Cassandra emerged from the guest room just as Derek was setting out the food, drawn by the aroma of orange chicken and vegetable lo mein. She was wearing one of my cardigans over her own tank top, a casual appropriation that I had learned to ignore rather than constantly battle. "Something smells amazing," she said, settling onto the sofa as if she had been specifically invited to join our dinner. "Derek got a promotion," I announced, unable to contain my excitement about our news. "We're moving to Burlington Heights in August." I expected Cassandra to offer congratulations, maybe express some sadness about our leaving, perhaps ask about our timeline for the move. Instead, she looked confused. "We're moving?" she asked, looking between Derek and me with raised eyebrows. The word "we" hung in the air like a challenge.
I looked at Derek, waiting for him to correct her assumption, to explain that this was a move for our marriage, our fresh start, our new beginning together. Instead, Derek cleared his throat and avoided my eyes. Actually, Nat, I've been thinking about that. Cassie's photography business is just starting to take off here in Maplewood Heights. She's built some good client relationships, gotten some steady contract work. It would be really hard for her to start over somewhere completely new. A cold feeling began spreading through my chest, but I tried to maintain my optimistic tone. Well, that's okay. She's doing well enough now that she can probably afford her own place here. This might actually be perfect timing for her to get back on her feet independently. Derek and Cassandra exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret, but it made my stomach clench with unease. The thing is, Derek continued, his voice taking on the careful tone he used when he knew he was about to say something I wouldn't like, the company is offering a really generous relocation package, enough to cover moving expenses for a small household, and the house we've been looking at has that extra bedroom, the one with the great natural light that would be perfect for photography work. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Derek wasn't planning a fresh start for our marriage. He was planning to relocate our current dysfunctional living situation to a new city. Cassandra wouldn't be left behind in Maplewood Heights to rebuild her independent life. She would be coming with us, continuing to live in our home, continuing to insert herself into every aspect of our relationship. "You want Cassandra to move with us," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It just makes sense," Derek said, his tone becoming defensive as he seemed to recognize the horror on my face. "She's family, Nat. We can't just abandon her when she's finally getting back on her feet. Besides, having someone to help with the mortgage payments will make the transition easier for all of us." Cassandra reached over and squeezed my arm with what appeared to be sympathy. "I know it's a lot to think about, Natalie, but I promise I'll try to stay out of your way. I'm so grateful for everything you and Derek have done for me already." Stay out of my way? As if the problem was simply a matter of physical space, rather than the complete erosion of boundaries in my marriage. As if having someone else help with our mortgage payments was worth sacrificing any hope of rebuilding intimacy and connection with my husband. The Chinese food grew cold on the coffee table as I tried to process what was happening. The fresh start I had been dreaming about for days was already being transformed into something entirely different. The new beginning I had hoped would save our marriage was simply going to be the same dysfunction in a prettier setting. "I need some air," I said quietly, standing up from the sofa. I walked out to our backyard and sat on the wooden swing that Derek had installed for me during our first summer in the house. The evening air was warm and humid, filled with the sound of crickets and distant laughter from neighboring homes. I thought about all the other couples in our neighborhood who were probably sitting down to quiet dinners together, planning their futures without having to navigate the complex needs and opinions of live-in friends. When I finally came back inside 20 minutes later, Derek and Cassandra were deep in conversation about logistics for the move. They had spread real estate listings across the coffee table and were discussing which neighborhoods would be best for Cassandra's photography business, which areas had the best public transportation options for her client meetings. I realized sitting there listening to them plan our future that I had been holding on to hope for something Derek had no intention of giving me. He wasn't planning to prioritize our marriage and rebuild our connection. He was planning to continue the exact same pattern of putting Cassandra's needs and comfort ahead of mine, just in a new location, with better lake views.
The weekend following Derek's revelation about Burlington Heights felt like living in a house made of glass, where every step had to be carefully calculated to avoid shattering what little remained of our relationship. Derek seemed to sense my withdrawal and made several attempts to engage me in conversations about the move, but I found myself unable to summon the enthusiasm he clearly expected. "You're being awfully quiet about the house hunting trip," he said Saturday morning, finding me reading in the sunroom with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "I thought you'd be excited to see the neighborhoods in person." I looked up from my book, a mystery novel that I hadn't absorbed a single word of, and tried to arrange my face into something resembling interest. "I'm sure whatever you and Cassandra decide will be fine." Derek frowned at my tone. "What's that supposed to mean? This is our decision, Nat. Our new home. I want you to love where we're going to live." Our decision. Our new home. The words felt hollow when I knew that our had somehow expanded to include a third person whose opinion would carry equal or greater weight than mine in every choice we made. But I wasn't ready for another confrontation. Not yet. I needed time to think, to process, to figure out what I was actually willing to accept and what I absolutely couldn't live with. I know, I said simply. I'm just processing everything. It's a big change. Derek seemed satisfied with this explanation and left me alone to continue my pretense of reading. But the truth was, I was doing much more than processing. I was conducting a thorough inventory of my marriage, examining every interaction, every decision, every moment over the past several months to understand how we had arrived at this point. What I discovered in that brutal self-examination was that Derek had been testing my boundaries for so long that he no longer believed I had any. Every time I had accommodated Cassandra's presence, every time I had swallowed my discomfort to keep the peace, every time I had chosen harmony over my own needs, I had been sending Derek a message that my feelings were negotiable, my comfort was optional, and my marriage was something that could be shared rather than protected. But it was more than just a pattern of accommodation. Looking back, I could see how Derek had systematically trained me to expect less and less from our relationship. It started with small things, canceling date nights when Cassandra needed support, including her in conversations that should have been private between us, allowing her to take over spaces in our home that should have remained ours alone. Each boundary violation had been presented as temporary, reasonable, or necessary due to Cassandra's circumstances. Each time I objected, Derek had framed my concerns as selfish or lack of understanding. Gradually, I had learned to silence my own needs rather than risk being labeled as unsupportive or unreasonable. The brilliant manipulation of it all was that Derek genuinely seemed to believe his own narrative. He wasn't consciously trying to harm our marriage or prioritize his friend over his wife. In his mind, he was simply being a good friend while expecting his wife to be understanding and flexible. The fact that his definition of understanding required me to essentially disappear into the background of my own life seemed to escape his notice entirely. Monday morning brought a conversation that crystallized everything I had been realizing over the weekend. I was getting dressed for work when Derek emerged from the shower, towel wrapped around his waist, casual and comfortable, in a way that reminded me of better times between us. He said, "I was thinking, maybe we should have a serious conversation with Cassie about expectations for the move. You know, establish some ground rules so everyone feels comfortable in the new house." For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe Derek was beginning to understand what I needed. Maybe he was finally recognizing that our marriage required some protection and prioritization. "What kind of ground rules?" I asked carefully. "Well, like contribution to household expenses. I think it's only fair that she pays a third of everything. Mortgage, utilities, groceries. And maybe we should establish some boundaries around shared spaces. She can have the guest room as her private area, but the living room and kitchen should be considered common areas, where we all need to be respectful of each other's needs." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Derek was talking about Cassandra like she's going to be a permanent part of our household, like this is going to be our normal living situation indefinitely. "Derek," I said slowly, "do you hear what you're saying?" He looked at me with genuine confusion. "What do you mean?" "You're talking about Cassandra like she's going to be a permanent part of our household, like this is going to be our normal living situation indefinitely." "Well, yeah," Derek said, his tone suggesting he couldn't understand why this would be surprising. "I mean, she's not going anywhere, Nat. She's family. This arrangement works for everyone. She gets affordable housing while she builds her business. We get help with expenses, and I get to maintain my oldest friendship. It's a win-win-win situation." Win-win-win. As if my marriage was a business transaction that could be optimized for maximum benefit to all stakeholders. As if intimate partnership was something that could be successfully managed through committee decisions and shared resources. "What about us?" I asked. my voice barely above a whisper. What about our marriage? What about having privacy and intimacy and space that belongs just to us? Derek finished buttoning his shirt and turned to face me fully, his expression patient but exasperated. Nat, we can have all of those things. It's not like Cassie is going to be in our bedroom or something. We'll have plenty of private time together. But that was exactly the problem. Derek thought privacy was simply a matter of physical space, when what I needed was emotional and psychological space as well. I needed to feel like I was the most important person in his life, not equal third with his college friend. I needed to feel like our marriage was sacred and protected, not something that could be constantly negotiated and shared. I want her to find her own place, I said, the words coming out more forcefully than I had intended. Derek stopped adjusting his tie and turned to face me fully. His expression, what? I want Cassandra to find her own apartment. I want it to be just us in Burlington Heights. I want our marriage to be our priority. The silence that followed felt dangerous, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Derek's face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked like disappointment. Nat, you can't be serious. We can't just kick Cassie out. She depends on us. She's been through enough upheaval already. She's been living here for 7 months, I said, my voice growing stronger. 7 months, Derek. She has a business now, clients, income. She can afford her own place. But why would we want her to leave? I don't understand why you're so threatened by her. Threatened. As if my desire for a normal marriage was some kind of jealousy or insecurity rather than a reasonable expectation of what marriage should be. I'm not threatened by her, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and rational. I just want my husband back. I want our marriage back. I want to feel like I matter more to you than your friend does. Derek sat down heavily on the edge of our bed, running his hands through his hair in that familiar gesture of frustration. Nat, you do matter to me. You know you do. But I can't just abandon my friendships because you're feeling insecure. That's not fair to ask. There it was again, the subtle but unmistakable message that my needs were unreasonable. My feelings were a problem to be managed rather than honored. My requests were selfish impositions on his more important relationships. I'm not asking you to abandon your friendship, I said quietly. I'm asking you to prioritize our marriage. I'm asking for what every wife should be able to expect, that her marriage comes first. But it's not that simple, Derek protested. Cassie has nowhere else to go. Her divorce left her with almost nothing. Her business is just getting started. We can't just throw her out on the street. And there it was, the ultimate test. Derek was presenting me with a choice that he had carefully constructed to make me look selfish no matter what I chose. Either I could accept the permanent presence of his friend in our marriage, or I could be the heartless woman who abandoned someone in need. But after months of being told that my feelings were less important than Cassandra's needs, after having my marriage slowly dissolved in a solution of constant accommodation and compromise, after watching my husband choose his friend's comfort over my happiness again and again, I finally understood something crucial. This wasn't really about Cassandra. This was about whether Derek respected me enough to fight for our marriage. This was about whether I mattered enough to him to be worth some difficult conversations and uncomfortable choices. And his answer, delivered through months of actions and now confirmed through words, was no. I looked at my husband sitting on our bed, genuinely bewildered by my requests for basic marital priorities,
and realized that I was done asking for something he was never going to give me willingly. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Think about what?" "About whether I can live like this." Derek's face shifted to alarm. "Nat, don't be dramatic. We can work this out. We just need to communicate better, maybe set some boundaries that work for everyone." But I was already walking toward the bedroom door, finally understanding that you can't communicate your way into being valued by someone who has decided you're not worth prioritizing. You can't negotiate your way into mattering to someone who has already demonstrated through their choices that you don't. The 3 days that followed my conversation with Derek felt like living in suspended animation. I went through the motions of normal life, working at the library, preparing meals, maintaining polite conversation, while internally preparing for something I had never imagined I would have to do. I was preparing to fight for my marriage in the most fundamental way possible, by refusing to accept anything less than what a marriage should be.
Derek seemed to sense that something significant was brewing beneath my calm exterior. He made several attempts to engage me in discussions about the Burlington Heights move, bringing home real estate listings and talking enthusiastically about neighborhoods and school districts as if nothing had changed between us. But there was a cautious quality to his interactions with me now, like someone trying to gauge the mood of an unpredictable animal. Cassandra, meanwhile, seemed blissfully unaware of any tension. She had thrown herself into planning for the move with characteristic enthusiasm, researching photography studios in Burlington Heights and making lists of local contacts she wanted to network with once we relocated. She had even started packing some of her belongings, neatly labeled boxes appearing in the guest room as if the move was a foregone conclusion. On Wednesday evening, I made my decision. I was going to have one final conversation with Derek and Cassandra together. I was going to clearly articulate what I needed from our marriage, and I was going to give them the opportunity to hear me and respond appropriately. If they couldn't or wouldn't respect those boundaries, then I would know exactly where I stood and could make my decisions accordingly. I spent Wednesday afternoon carefully planning what I wanted to say. I wrote down my main points on a small notepad, the same way I used to prepare for difficult conversations with library patrons or challenging meetings with my supervisor. I wanted to be calm, rational, and clear. I didn't want to give Derek any opportunity to dismiss my concerns as emotional overreaction or temporary frustration. That evening, I found Derek and Cassandra in the living room, surrounded by moving brochures and laptop computers as they researched utility companies and internet providers in Burlington Heights. They looked up when I entered, Derek with a slightly wary expression, and Cassandra with her usual bright smile. "Can we talk?" I said, settling into the armchair across from where they sat together on the sofa. "All three of us. I have some things I need to say about the move and our living arrangements." Derek immediately looked relieved, as if he thought this meant I was ready to embrace his vision of our expanded household. "Of course! We want you to feel comfortable with all the plans." I took a deep breath and consulted my notes, determined to stay focused and clear despite the nervous energy coursing through my system. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, Derek, about establishing ground rules for our new house, and I realized that I have some non-negotiable boundaries that I need to communicate clearly." Cassandra leaned forward with interest, as if this was a collaborative problem-solving session rather than a conversation about the future of my marriage. "First, I need advance notice when friends or guests are coming to our home, at least 24 hours notice, except for genuine emergencies. Second, I need our bedroom to remain completely private. No one enters our bedroom without explicit permission from both Derek and me. Third, I need some evenings each week that are reserved exclusively for Derek and me without interruptions or additional company." I paused, looking between them to gauge their reactions. Derek's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. Cassandra looked confused, as if she wasn't sure whether these rules were supposed to apply to her.
Fourth, I continued, I need equal say in all major household decisions, everything from furniture placement to social plans to financial expenditures. And finally, I need to feel like my marriage is the primary relationship in this household, which means that when there's a conflict between what I need and what anyone else needs, my needs as Derek's wife take priority. The silence that followed felt heavy and charged. Derek and Cassandra exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret, but it made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Finally, Derek spoke. Nat, some of these seem a little extreme. I mean, we're all adults here. Do we really need formal rules about everything? These aren't extreme, I said quietly. These are basic boundaries that most marriages have naturally. The fact that they seem extreme to you tells me exactly how far we've gotten off track. Cassandra shifted uncomfortably on the sofa, and I could see her trying to decide whether to speak or remain silent. Finally, she chose to speak. Natalie, I understand that you want to feel comfortable in your own home, but some of these rules would make me feel like a guest in my own space. I mean, if I'm paying a third of the mortgage and expenses, shouldn't I have equal say in household decisions too? Equal say. As if my marriage was a democracy where my husband's friend got to vote on the direction of our relationship. This isn't your space, Cassandra, I said, my voice remaining calm despite the surge of anger I felt. This is my marriage and my home. You're a guest here, and you've been a guest here for 7 months now. Derek's face flushed with irritation. Nat, that's not fair. Cassie is family. She's not some random guest who overstayed her welcome.
And there it was, the fundamental disconnect that had been poisoning our marriage for months. In Derek's mind, Cassandra wasn't someone who had moved into our marriage. We had simply expanded our family to include her. In his worldview, expecting her to respect the boundaries of our marriage made me the unreasonable one. She's your friend, Derek, I said, my voice growing stronger. She's your family, not ours. I never chose this arrangement, and I'm not comfortable continuing it. Cassandra's face crumpled slightly, and she looked to Derek as if expecting him to defend her against my unreasonable demands. I can't believe you're saying this, Natalie. After everything we've been through together, after all the support Derek and I have given each other over the years, I thought we were closer than this. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost missed it. Suddenly, I was the villain in a story about friendship and loyalty and mutual support. My desire for a normal marriage had been reframed as a betrayal of some deeper bond that I had apparently never understood. But I was done being manipulated. I was done having my reasonable requests twisted into character flaws. I was done being made to feel guilty for wanting what every married woman should be able to expect. I don't think you understand, I said, standing up from my chair. These aren't requests for discussion. These are my boundaries. These are the conditions under which I'm willing to continue this marriage. Derek's eyes widened with something that might have been alarm. Nat, you can't just issue ultimatums. Marriage is about compromise. I've been compromising for 7 months. I've compromised my comfort, my privacy, my needs, and my marriage. I'm done compromising. These boundaries are non-negotiable. Cassandra's voice was small and hurt when she spoke. So what are you saying? That I have to move out? That I have to find somewhere else to live just because you're uncomfortable sharing space? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I'm saying. The word hung in the air like a challenge. For 7 months, I had been dancing around this fundamental truth, trying to find ways to make an impossible situation work, attempting to accommodate everyone's needs except my own. But there was no middle ground here. Either I was going to have a marriage, or I was going to have a 3-way living arrangement that pretended to be a marriage.
Derek stood up abruptly, his face flush with anger. "This is ridiculous, Nat. You're asking me to choose between my wife and my best friend." "No," I said calmly. "I'm asking you to choose your wife over your best friend. There's a difference." "That's not fair, Cassandra," interjected, tears now visible in her eyes. "Derek and I have been friends for 15 years. You can't just expect him to throw that away because you're feeling jealous or insecure." Jealous, insecure. The same words Derek had used, the same dismissive labels that were supposed to make me question my own sanity rather than their completely inappropriate behavior. But something had shifted inside me during those 3 days of preparation. Something had crystallized in my understanding of what I was worth and what I deserved. I was no longer the woman who could be convinced that her reasonable needs were unreasonable demands. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice steady and clear. "These aren't requests for discussion. These are my boundaries. These are the conditions under which I'm willing to continue this marriage." Derek's eyes stared at me as if he was seeing me for the first time, as if the woman who had accommodated and compromised and swallowed her needs for months had suddenly been replaced by someone he didn't recognize. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked. I looked at my husband and his best friend sitting together on our sofa, united in their conviction that I was being unreasonable, and I felt something inside me finally break free from years of trying to be understood by people who had no interest in understanding me. "It means," I said quietly, "these are my boundaries, and if you can't respect them, then I can't stay." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek and Cassandra stared at me with identical expressions of shock, as if they couldn't quite believe that the woman who had been invisible for so long had suddenly become very, very visible indeed. I didn't wait for their response. The moment I saw their matching expressions of shock transform into the familiar partnership of Derek and Cassandra against unreasonable Natalie, I knew exactly what their answer would be. I had given them a clear choice, and their silence was an answer in itself. I walked calmly to our bedroom and pulled my suitcase down from the top shelf of the closet. The same designer luggage from Aunt Priscilla that had never been used for its intended purpose was finally going to take me somewhere important, away from people who had spent 7 months teaching me that my value was negotiable. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations in the living room, but I didn't strain to listen. Whatever Derek and Cassandra were discussing, it didn't involve me. It never really had. I packed methodically, taking only what truly belonged to me. My clothes, my jewelry, my books, my grandmother's necklace safely tucked into its velvet box. I left behind the throw pillows I had chosen for our sofa, the artwork I had selected for our walls, the kitchen gadgets I had researched and purchased to make our house feel like a home. Those things belonged to a version of myself that no longer existed. The woman who had believed that making a beautiful home would somehow make her worthy of being prioritized within it. When I emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, rolling my suitcase behind me, Derek was standing in the hallway waiting for me. His face was pale, and his hair was disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. "Nat, please, let's talk about this rationally. You don't have to leave. We can work something out." "Work something out," I repeated quietly. "You mean find another compromise where I accept less than what I need so that you don't have to make any difficult choices?" "That's not what I mean," Derek protested. I mean, we can find a solution that works for everyone. Maybe Cassie could get her own place eventually, when her business is more stable. Maybe we could set some time limits or boundaries that make you more comfortable." Eventually, maybe. Time limits that could be extended, boundaries that could be negotiated away whenever the next crisis arose. Derek was offering me the same false hope that had kept me trapped in this situation for 7 months, dressed up in slightly different language. Derek, I said gently, do you love me more than you love Cassandra? He looked startled by the directness of the question. That's not... You can't compare different kinds of love, Nat. You're my wife, she's my friend. It's not the same thing. I'm not asking you to compare different kinds of love. I'm asking you whose needs come first when there's a conflict. I'm asking you who you choose when you can't make everyone happy. Derek's face went through several expressions: confusion, frustration, something that might have been pain. Why are you making me choose? Why can't we all just get along? And there it was. After 7 months of watching his friend slowly take over our marriage, after countless conversations about boundaries and respect and basic marital priorities, Derek still fundamentally didn't understand what I was asking for. He genuinely believed that expecting him to prioritize his wife over his friend was unreasonable. We can't all just get along, I said quietly, because Cassandra isn't part of our marriage. She's part of your life, but she's not part of ours. And until you understand the difference, we don't have a marriage worth fighting for. I could hear Cassandra crying softly in the living room, and I felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy. She probably genuinely didn't understand why I was being so harsh, so unaccommodating, so unwilling to share the man she considered her closest friend. In her mind, she was the victim here, the woman who had been abandoned by her husband, betrayed by her friends, and now being cast out by the people she thought cared about her. But my sympathy was limited. Cassandra was a grown woman who had spent 7 months inserting herself into every aspect of my marriage while playing innocent about the damage she was causing. Whether her behavior was conscious manipulation or unconscious selfishness didn't matter anymore. The result was the same. "Where will you go?" Derek asked, his voice small and lost. "To my sister's house in Riverside Falls, for now." Amy had been my closest friend before I married Derek, and she had remained a steady presence in my life even after I moved to Maplewood Heights. I had a feeling she wouldn't be surprised by this turn of events. For how long? I looked at my husband standing in the hallway of what had been our home, and I felt something that was almost like grief. This wasn't the ending I had wanted for us. This wasn't the marriage I had dreamed of building when I said yes to his proposal on the beach at Sunset Cove. "I don't know," I said honestly, "until I figure out what I want my life to look like." "And us? What about us?" "There is no us right now, Derek. There's you and Cassandra, and there's me. That's been true for months. I'm just finally admitting it." I walked past him toward the front door, and he didn't try to stop me. I think some part of him was relieved that I was making the choice he couldn't bring himself to make. As long as I was the one leaving, he could maintain his narrative about being caught between two people he cared about, rather than facing the truth that he had chosen one over the other months ago.
The evening air was cool against my skin as I loaded my suitcase into my car. Through the living room window, I could see Derek comforting Cassandra, his arm around her shoulders as she leaned into his chest. They looked like what they had always been, best friends supporting each other through a difficult moment. They looked like what I had never really been allowed to be, the most important person in Derek's life. I drove to Riverside Falls that night, arriving at Amy's cottage-style house just after 10 o'clock. She took one look at my face and my suitcase and pulled me into a hug without asking any questions. "He chose her," I said simply, and Amy nodded as if she had been expecting this conversation for months. "I'm proud of you for leaving," she said, leading me to her guest room. "I know that couldn't have been easy." It wasn't easy, but as I lay in Amy's guest bed that night,
Listening to the sound of rain against the windows and the absence of whispered conversations and photography equipment and someone else's needs constantly taking precedence over my own, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The next few weeks passed in a blur of practical arrangements and emotional processing. I took a leave of absence from my job at the Millbrook Public Library and threw myself into figuring out what I wanted my life to look like without Derek in it. Amy was the perfect host, supportive without being pushy, present without being overwhelming. Derek called several times during those first weeks, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to pleading to confused. He couldn't understand why I was being so stubborn, why I couldn't just come home and work things out like reasonable adults. He promised that he and Cassandra would establish better boundaries, that they would be more considerate of my needs, that things would be different. But I had heard those promises before, and I knew exactly how much they were worth. Derek still didn't understand that the problem wasn't poor boundary management or insufficient consideration. The problem was that he had fundamentally reorganized his priorities in a way that left no room for a real marriage. I didn't return his calls. I was done explaining myself to someone who had repeatedly demonstrated that my explanations fell on deaf ears. Instead, I focused on rediscovering who I was outside of my role as Derek's accommodating wife. I started taking long walks along the river that ran behind Amy's house. I read books that I chose simply because they interested me, not because they might spark conversations that Derek would want to have. I began researching master's degree programs in library science, something I had always wanted to pursue but had put off for various practical reasons. Most importantly, I started remembering what it felt like to matter. Amy treated my opinions as valuable, my preferences as worth considering, my comfort as important. When I mentioned that I missed cooking but felt overwhelmed by the idea of preparing elaborate meals, she suggested we'd take turns making simple dinners for each other. When I said I wanted to try watercolor painting but felt intimidated by the expensive supplies, she drove me to the art store and helped me select a basic starter kit. These were such simple kindnesses, such basic demonstrations of care and consideration. But after months of having my needs treated as optional inconveniences, Amy's natural thoughtfulness felt revolutionary. 3 weeks after I left Maplewood Heights, I made a decision that surprised even me. I applied for a head librarian position at the Riverside Falls Public Library. It was a significant promotion from my previous job, with better pay and more responsibility. More importantly, it was a chance to build something that was entirely mine in a place where I could start fresh, without the weight of failed compromises and broken promises. I got the job. When I called Derek to tell him about my new position, thinking he deserved to know that I was moving forward with my life, his response was immediate and predictable. "You got a job in Riverside Falls? Not. What are you doing? You can't just start a new life because we're having some problems. Marriage is about working through difficulties together." Working through difficulties? I almost laughed at the irony. For 7 months, I had been trying to work through difficulties while Garrick focused on protecting everyone's feelings except mine. "I'm not starting a new life because we're having problems," I said calmly. "I'm starting a new life because you've made it clear that there's no room for me in yours." "That's not true," Derek protested. "Of course there's room for you. You're my wife." Being your wife used to mean something. It used to mean that I mattered more than anyone else. It used to mean that our marriage was sacred and protected. But you've redefined what being your wife means, and I'm not interested in the new definition. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small and uncertain. "So that's it? You're just giving up on us?"
"I'm not giving up on us, Derek," I said gently. "There is no us anymore. You dissolved us when you decided that keeping everyone happy was more important than keeping your wife happy. You ended our marriage when you chose to protect Cassandra's feelings over mine, again and again, for 7 months. I hung up the phone and sat quietly in Amy's kitchen, feeling something that was part sadness and part relief. The marriage I had thought I wanted was officially over. But for the first time in months, I was excited about what came next. 6 months after I walked out of my marriage, I was hosting my first dinner party in my new home, a charming 2-bedroom cottage on Elm Street in Riverside Falls that I had purchased entirely on my own. The promotion to head librarian had come with a salary increase that made home ownership possible, and for the first time in my adult life, I was creating a space that reflected only my tastes, my needs, my vision of what home should feel like. The dining room was warm and intimate, with soft lighting from vintage brass fixtures and fresh flowers from the farmer's market downtown. I had set the table for 8, the perfect number for meaningful conversation without the chaos of a larger gathering. Every person sitting around my table was someone who had seen me, valued me, and chosen to be part of my life during my darkest moments. Amy sat to my right, having become not just my sister-in-law by choice, but my closest friend and strongest supporter. Across from her was Dr. Patricia Vaughn, the library board president who had taken a chance on me, despite my lack of administrative experience. Next to Patricia sat Marcus Chen, a fellow librarian who had become both a valued colleague and someone I was cautiously beginning to explore romantic possibilities with. The conversation flowed easily around topics that mattered to all of us: upcoming library programs, local politics, book recommendations, travel plans. No one interrupted anyone else. No one dismissed anyone's opinions as less important. No one's needs took precedence over everyone else's comfort. It was such a simple thing, really. A group of adults treating each other with basic respect and consideration. But after years of living in a household where my voice was constantly drowned out by more urgent concerns, the normalcy of it felt miraculous. "Natalie," Patricia said, raising her wine glass, "I want to propose a toast to new beginnings and the courage to choose yourself when no one else will." Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. These people had watched me rebuild my life from scratch, had supported me through the divorce proceedings, had celebrated every small victory along the way. They had seen me at my most vulnerable and had never once suggested that I should lower my standards or accept less than I deserved. The divorce had been finalized just 2 weeks earlier. Derek had fought it initially, convinced that I was going through some kind of temporary crisis that would resolve itself if he just waited long enough. He had sent flowers to my office, left voicemails promising that things would be different if I came home, even shown up at Amy's house once to try to convince me to give our marriage another chance. But I had remained firm in my boundaries. I had learned, through months of therapy and self-reflection, that love without respect wasn't really love at all. Derek might have genuinely cared about me, but he had never respected me enough to prioritize our marriage over his other relationships. And without that fundamental respect, we had never really had a marriage worth saving. The final straw for Derek had come when he discovered that Cassandra was dating someone new, a photographer she had met at one of her networking events. Suddenly, the woman who had needed his constant support and protection was building an independent life with someone else. The friend he had sacrificed his marriage to help was moving on without him. Derek's last voicemail had been a rambling, emotional message about how he finally understood what I had been trying to tell him. He could see now how inappropriate Cassandra's behavior had been, how she had manipulated both of us, how he had been blind to the damage their friendship was causing. He wanted another chance to prove that he could be the husband I deserved. But understanding the problem after you've lost everything isn't the same as being capable of preventing the problem in the first place. Derek had revealed something fundamental about his character during those 7 months. His inability to set boundaries with people he cared about, his tendency to avoid difficult conversations at any cost, his willingness to sacrifice his wife's happiness to maintain peace in his other relationships.
Those weren't temporary flaws that could be fixed with better communication or clearer expectations. They were core personality traits that would surface again the next time someone in Derek's life needed support or accommodation. I couldn't build a marriage on the hope that Derek would suddenly develop the backbone to choose me when the next crisis arose. So I had signed the divorce papers without hesitation, officially ending a marriage that had been over long before I finally found the courage to leave.
As dinner wound down and my guests began helping me clear the table, I caught my reflection in the antique mirror that hung above my sideboard. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized from a year ago. She was confident, peaceful, self-possessed in a way that the old Natalie had never been. I had learned to take up space without apologizing for it. I had learned that my needs weren't selfish just because someone else found them inconvenient. I had learned that the right people would respect my boundaries rather than constantly testing them. Most importantly, I had learned that I didn't need anyone else's permission to value myself. My phone buzzed with a text message as I was loading the dishwasher. For a moment, my heart clenched with the old anxiety. Was it Derek again with another attempt to resurrect something that had been dead for months? But it was Marcus, who had left only an hour earlier, thanking me for a wonderful evening and asking if I would like to join him for coffee the next afternoon. I smiled as I typed back my acceptance, marveling at how simple dating could be when it involved someone who actually wanted to spend time with you, rather than someone who was constantly managing competing priorities. Later that evening, as I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and a book I had chosen purely for my own enjoyment, I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman who had spent years walking on eggshells, constantly adjusting her behavior to accommodate someone else's comfort, believing that love meant making yourself smaller so that others could feel bigger. That woman had been so afraid of being alone that she had accepted being lonely within her own marriage. She had been so desperate to be chosen that she had forgotten she had the power to choose herself. But sitting in my own home, surrounded by furniture I had selected, and books I had chosen, and artwork that spoke to my soul, I finally understood what Derek had never been able to grasp. Being alone wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a person. Being invisible was worse. Being taken for granted was worse. Being forced to compete for basic respect in your own marriage was worse. I had spent 32 years learning how to be the kind of woman that other people would want to keep around. But it had taken losing everything to teach me how to be the kind of woman that I wanted to be. My cottage was small but perfectly suited to my needs. My job was challenging but rewarding in ways that my previous position had never been. My friendships were built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than convenience or obligation. And my relationship with Marcus was developing naturally, without the constant drama and negotiation that had characterized my marriage to Derek. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't trying to earn anyone's love or prove my worthiness or convince someone to prioritize me over their other interests. I was simply living my life according to my own values and standards, trusting that the right people would appreciate what I had to offer. The old Natalie would have seen this evening, a simple dinner party with friends who valued my company, as ordinary, unremarkable, nothing special. But the woman I had become understood that this was actually extraordinary. This was what life looked like when you refused to accept less than you deserved. This was what peace felt like when you stopped fighting for scraps of attention from people who had already decided you weren't worth their full consideration. I raised my teacup in a private toast to the